Charles E. Martin, CharlesEMartin.
And if you don't mind, can you try to rephrase my question in your answer? So if I asked you, for instance, where were you born, Mr. Martin? Instead of just saying Winchester, you'd say I was born in Winchester. That way they don't hear my voice on the film when they're cutting it. Sound good?
All right.
All right. So Winchester, was Muncie always the big city?
I've always lived in Muncie ever since I was 2.
Yeah. What do you remember about Muncie growing up?
There's been a lot of changes.
Yeah. How so?
Well, when I was young, there was interurban, and there was a big thing where J.C. Penney's, and then later it was Workforce on Charles Street. That used to be the interurban station, a great big building where the trolley cars run into. And there was trolley lines from Muncie to through Hartford City up to where 28 is and into Marion. And downtown there wasn't any shopping malls at that time. And everything on McGalliard was farmland when I was growing up. On the north side of McGalliard, it was all farmland at that time.
What did your father do when you were growing up?
He worked at BorgWarner.
So he got you hired in there, or
well, yeah, more or less.
How did you get hired in at BorgWarner?
Well, I came out of the Navy in '46, and at that time, the government was giving you $20 a week for 52 weeks when you got out of the service. And $20 a week back then was a lot of money. You could party all weekend and all week on it. I think I got 3 checks, and my dad said, "Don't you think you've laid around long enough?" He took me to Warner Gear, and at that time, Fred Fell was one of the men over employment. He took me in, gave me an interview, and Fred says, "Can he come to work this afternoon?" My dad says, "He'll be here." So I was there till just before they closed.
Now, when you were a little younger, before you even went off to the Navy when you were growing up, do you remember any activities associated with BorgWarner that you attended, dances or anything that your dad, picnics?
No, back in, up until my dad helped form the union there, and there was strike breakers, thugs come down from Detroit and beat up the guys. And my dad and a lot of the other workers got the kids' ball bats, and they went back the next day, and when they come down there, they worked them over. And so then the union was formed at BorgWarner. After the union was formed, they had a few activities. It was usually done by the union more than the company. Well, then the company got where they was recognized the people's service and done things. But then over a period of time, they got real chintzy on that. Like when I got my 40 I believe it was 40 years in, either 40 or 45, they gave you a diamond ring, which is a nice ring. Later on, the people that had the same amount of time got chintzy stuff. They hired some outfit, they put out a book, you had choices in the book for what you got. And most of the stuff was not near. I mean, the people that got their time later really got shafted on that.
Why was that? Was the union giving you the ring, or did the company?
No, the company. And they just, more greed. They got to where they didn't care about. The people were just a bean instead of a person to them. The bean counter in Chicago. And that was pretty much the downfall of the Muncie plant. Poor management, very poor management. When I started there, they had one of the best systems there was. They paid you for what you put out. You got paid. It was group system, but they paid by the number of good pieces. If you scrapped a piece, it took off your production. So you tried not to scrap any. Well, the people come in there, a lot of them come in the 60s. Some of them weren't very work related. Some of them thought the world owed them a living. And if they got their seniority, then the union had to protect them. But the union got to where they was like management or like government. They got bigger than they should have been and wasn't looking after the welfare of the majority of their members. And the company, rather than argue with the union, would do things that they shouldn't have done. In other words, like when we was on incentive plan, they had, like if your machine was down, they paid you so much for downtime. Well, when the people wasn't working, the group leaders would pad the downtime to make up for the people they'd tell the boss, and the boss wouldn't do nothing about it. So then the group leaders padded, well then the boss would sign it rather than argue with the union because they knew the people was not doing their job. Instead of firing them or at least getting them laid off for a while so they'd realize they had to work, they just signed the day work. Well, then the bean counters at Chicago found that the day work was way above world average. We can't have this. So then, instead of them correcting the foremans and doing what they should have done, they spent millions of dollars, I'm not sure the exact cost, but it was quite a few, putting a light system in on every machine, and the boss had to come around and key you down. Well, when you have a lot of people under you, the bosses was busy running around keying people down when they had trouble. They was losing production because when the person was down, they wouldn't get paid for the parts. And so then there was people that learned how to cheat because anything electronic can usually be overridden. And they was losing more on that. And then they scrapped that and went to the worst thing they could ever done. They went like Chevrolet. They went to the straight hourly rate, where a lot of people says, well, it all pays the same. Why should I work? When the good workers see the other people not doing anything, then it even hurt the production of the good people. So it just spiraled downhill, and it was 80% of it was management's fault. Then there was also the change in economy and what was needed. They sold off 3 divisions that would have kept that plant running for years. They sold off the industrial, which was the biggest profit-making transmission they had. It was for things like earth movers and stuff like that. And they sold off the marine division, and at the time they was the best marine transmission in the world. Well, they sold it off. People that took it over wasn't doing a good job because it had real high tolerances on the parts. And so they started losing business, and then an Italian manufacturer took over, and actually was a lot of the boats that was, and all the Mercruiser and all them. One guy asked me one time at Dale Hollow, he said, how's come they don't put out more of the Marines? Said, we'd take everything they did. But BorgWarner was like this. They'd want Chevy or Ford to pay the cost of tooling up for a job for them. And big companies like Ford and Chevy and Chrysler could do it, but smaller companies like Mercruiser couldn't. But yet they was already tooled up. All they had to do was expand it a little, and they chose not to do it. They shipped it off to a guy that was one of the wheels at another plant.
Now, when those lines were taken out of the plant, did you know that that was the beginning of the end? What was your sense of things?
When, not necessarily when they was took out. When they took out the experimental division and moved it to Detroit, I knew right then that the plant was going down. And it lasted a little longer than I figured it would, but it didn't last near as long as a lot of people wanted it to.
Now, what kind of things did you do to prepare, or did you do anything to prepare for the plant closing?
Well, I really didn't need to, because in the first place, I had over 30 years, and I was over 62. I was getting my pension, plus Social Security, plus my wages. So I had a fairly high income at that time.
Wow, you got paid your pension while you were still working?
Yeah. After I turned 70.
Now, did you retire actually before? Were you laid off, or did you actually retire before?
They couldn't lay me off. They told me if I didn't retire by this certain date before they was closing, that I would lose my insurance. Well, I've got a 15-year-old daughter. I didn't want to lose my insurance. So I go in and sign up for retirement. 2 weeks after I signed up, they send me a letter. My insurance is all changed and I lose it. I had to pay for my wife's and my daughter's. I had to pay for my prescription. The only amount that they pay is a backup on the supplement for Medicare. And it's taken a lot of my money just to pay prescriptions right now. Like my wife has one, she's on depression. She has one that was costing $50. Then it went up to $100, and the last one I had filled was $200 for the same prescription. And they say, well, it's changed. Yeah, it's changed.
We've heard several people have talked about this generational conflict there at the end concerning the closing. The guys that had under 30 years and the guys that had over 30 years and the selling of benefits. Can you talk about that a little bit?
A lot of the young guys was wanting a big payout, which really most companies did, like General Motors did. Of course, General Motors and Ford, because of their size, but the government was wrong ever since World War II. They allowed stuff to come in from foreign countries that they didn't tax enough. In other words, like if you bought a Pinto in Japan, that was, you probably don't remember it, but it was a small Ford car, cheap. They charged more than a Cadillac for it by the time they taxed it. Well, they started leaving their cars come in here cheaper than they was making them, shipping them all the way across on boats. And instead of taxing it and using it for welfare and things they're taxing the American people for, they allowed it. In no other country can you go in and own land unless you're a citizen. Foreign countries now own 50% of the United States or more. A lot of people don't know it. Your dairy land is owned by the Dutch. Your Germans own a lot. Japan owns a major portion of all your television almost, and your movie industry and everything was took over by Japanese. And in no other country can you own controlling stock. You can own stock, you can own 49%, but you can never have over controlling where you're 51%. And in the United States they do. And all these things caused a collapse of the United States economy.
So government regulation.
I gotta run. So it was nice to meet you. I got an appointment I gotta go to.
That's all right.
But I'll see you guys later.
Government regulation is something that you named for contributing to the plant's closing, and poor management from BorgWarner, the company itself. What was the union's part?
Unions was like, they got to where, my dad helped form the union, and back then they needed unions because during the Depression when Dad worked there, they'd go out there in the lobby and they'd call a man in and they'd work him for 2 hours and then send him back out the lobby and make him sit maybe for 8 to get another 2. Well, back then, your garment industries and everything was abusing people. And so unions were a necessity and should have been a godsend for the whole country. In my opinion, one of the downfalls of the unions was partly their fault, but partly Reagan fired the air traffic controllers. Every union in the United States should have walked out over that, because right after that, armor plant started firing the people that was on strike, having scabs come in, giving them more time, people that worked there for 20 years, things that shouldn't be done. And it just escalated to where a lot of people was afraid to even try to form a union. The unions, their fault was they protected people that they shouldn't have protected, that was especially when they was relatives or friends of the stewards or members on the board. They'd protect them more than they should, get them back when they was either drunks or using drugs or not working, doing things they shouldn't do, and get them back and get them paid, and then lose parts that they should have had in the contract. The unions got to where they was like government. They was mismanaged badly. Most of your government officials right now, if they go in honest, they're not in a year before some lobbyist has got them bought off with campaign money. And they're not voting what the average American person needs, or this country wouldn't be in the shape it's in right now. All the companies was paying out big bonuses to their top executives and people that had a lot of stock, and leaving their funds for their retirement underfunded greatly, not just a little, but greatly. BorgWarner's was better than a lot of companies, but even they was underfunded almost 40%. General Motors was underfunded 55. And if all these people in the United States that work for General Motors, if they try to get out of those fundings, it'll be the worst depression anyone's ever seen. And it'll cause people will rob, steal, and kill to feed their family where they would be normally nice people. And it's not a funny thing to look at. And as far as I'm concerned, no one president, and I don't care which branch he was from, is going to get us out of this $1 trillion debt in 4 to 8 years. It's impossible. When Clinton left, there was a balance in the budget. In 8 years, Bush knocked it completely. Trillion. That war over there should, my opinion of this, when they first went in, if there was weapons of mass destruction, but when they got in and found there was none, then they shouldn't try to change their religion or the way them people live. The Bible says the end of the world is going to be a religious war. And right now they're trying to change other people. They don't let them change themselves. If they want to change, let them do it themselves. Don't stick your nose in their business. That ruins, a lot of them people hate us because of that.
When you walked in the door at BorgWarner, just out of the Navy in '46, what was your impression the first day? You had just seen war yourself. What was your impression of worker camaraderie? Did workers get together outside of work? Was everybody friends?
Well, you had a lot of friends from work. I still do. I mean, I see people all the time. They'll stop, talk to me, and ask how things is going. I had to go to the hardware store this morning because a guy mowed my mower was down because I needed a part for it, and the wife gets impatient, so she hired a man that comes over next door. It's a brother to the lady that lives next door, and he mowed it. Well, when he mowed it, he cut my water line to my pool, and it was just spraying water all over, and I had to go down and get a part to repair the line. And the guy that's down there worked there. Of course, he had his 30 years and went out, but he's working there part-time. And of course, we talked, and I told him that I was coming out here, that you had called for an interview. And he made a few jokes about it. He said, you're going to tell him how bad a euchre player you was and so forth. Because we used to play euchre on our break and at dinner, but then it got to where we didn't do that.
Why did that happen?
A lot of times, different bosses and different people left that played with, retired and stuff, and just got to where the ones that were doing it didn't do it. It wasn't that they didn't want to, it was just there wasn't the right number of people to get together for a game at dinner like they used to be 3 and 4 games at dinner time down there. Then it got where there was none.
You must be a quick euchre player.
Huh?
You must be a quick euchre player. How long do you have for dinner?
20 minutes. But a lot of times, before they went on this straight Arley, I had a boss got on me once because I was coming back from dinner a few minutes late. And at that time, I was running 3 different jobs. I was running a heat treat, a centerless grinder, a hone, and a robot by myself. And on afternoons and midnights, they had 3 people running them. and I was running more parts and better parts than the other two shifts. So when he got on me, I said, that's all right. I said, I can stay here and not even go to dinner. I said, but I'm not going to run any more than them other two shifts. Well, then he backs off. He said, well, you understand I got to say something. I said, well, you said it. I said, if you want me to keep putting out what I'm putting out, I said, don't get on me about if I go to the restroom or if I'm 5 minutes late getting back from dinner or something when the other people are not getting out near as much. So he never, from that time on, he never ever give me any argument. But a lot of the people, like one of the guys that they made a boss and later made him an engineer, he was on midnights on this same line I'm talking about. And I went there at 7 and the whole line was down. And of course, I said the company made a stupid mistake when they done that, because they tied a lot of machines together, automatic, where the conveyor would feed. Well, they didn't figure the national or world downtime. This is another management decision that was stupid. If they had figured it out logically, they would have never done it, because when you tie machines together and one of them goes down, it stops the others, unless you have offload positions, and that takes extra manpower. But what they done, they had conveyors and robots, and it was just the start of robots back then. And but anyway, I went in there, and this first grinder was down, the rough grinder. And it was a centerless. And this guy that they made foreman and later an engineer was sitting there on the stool. I said, what's wrong? He says, I'm waiting on a tech. He says, the carrier won't transfer. Well, the carrier had 3 procs on it that tell the carrier where it's at. Like it'll go here and stop, then it goes down and picks up a part. Well, one of them procs, I don't know if he done it or how, but it was knocked off. Angle. I adjusted it and had the machine going in 15 minutes, and it had been down all night. Then every machine following that was down because they was waiting on stock from that machine. And like I said, where management made their mistake, when you tie machines together, it works to a certain extent, but the world average, I think at that time on downtime, was like 18% down. Well, you figure if you have 5 machines and each one of them is down at a different time, 18%, how much of your production are you losing?
So was there a lot of sitting around at work when machines were down?
Well, yeah, a lot of them people wouldn't even try to get them going. They'd say, hey, it's not my job, that's the electrician's job.
Now, were you technically overstepping when you fixed the machine? Were you not supposed to do that?
Minor adjustments you was allowed to make on the machine. And that was a minor adjustment. You're not supposed to take the procs off or do anything like that, but you are allowed to test them before you even call a tech. In other words, like if a proc goes bad, you could take a metal piece and put over it, and it'll have a red light that'll light up. If that red light don't light up, you know that proc's bad, and you call a tech to come replace it. And then you're down and can't help it. But if that proc lights up and it's not doing what it should, it means it's just a hair out of adjustment. It's like garage doors. These safeties on garage doors are the same thing. They're a laser light that connects with another light, and anything gets in the way stops the door. Stops the door from coming down on a person or an object. it works the same way. And like mine got out the other day, and it wouldn't go down unless I held onto the button. I went out and adjusted the light. It's working.
In 1946, how old were you when you got hired?
I was 20, going on 21.
And if you don't mind me asking, how old are you today?
I'm 83.
And it was just, I guess, several months ago that you retired. Is that correct?
Just before, like 2 months before they closed, or a month and a half, 2 months before they closed.
During that time, were you ever a part of layoffs or strikes?
No, I was one of the, I was in the strikes, yes, everyone they had almost. A couple of them was useless. One time we went back for less than what the company had offered earlier. And that was another thing that I said about unions. You know, trying to get a brother-in-law or somebody back that shouldn't have come back.
Was that the 1989 strike where you went back for less, or was that another strike?
The only strike, there was only 2 strikes that I felt were justifiable in the time that I was there. One of them was when we struck for insurance, and that was a long one. It was a real long one. I worked laying hod for a bricklayer and digging ditches and a whole lot of things to try to keep my bills paid. But that one was badly needed.
Well, we've never had that happen. Apparently Bruce is needed. You shut that thing off, maybe? Yeah. Thanks. So we were talking about strikes. I'm wondering if there was any. What I'm really getting at is kind of the strength of the union over the time you were there. How were some of these early strikes? Were there any strikes in the late 40s that you remember? I mean,
in the late 40s, the union had a lot of power. In fact, in my opinion, some of the idiots walked out when they shouldn't. And BorgWarner lost, at that time it was Warner Gear, and they lost production that shouldn't have been lost. But if something happened, and sometimes the rumors weren't really correct, and the whole plant would walk out, not just the place that was affected, but the whole plant would walk out. The rumor would go down, everybody would leave. Well, then they come up with laws to where they could stop that, which they should have. Unions, like I said, being like government and not doing what was best for the majority of the people, hurt the unions. But to me, unions are needed. You need somebody, but they got to where a lot of times they wouldn't protect what they should protect. In other words, I don't think the union lawyers protected the workers at BorgWarner near enough. I know of people out there, this one man, his son does a lot of work for me since I got old and decrepit, and he don't have a decent job, but he's a very good worker. But his dad worked with me, and he was a good worker, and he actually had 30 years, but they took some of it away. They said, well, you was laid off a certain time. They took time away. Well, then later, they agreed to give it back to the people, and then later they took it away. He liked one day of having these 30 years, nothing. They didn't want to give him nothing. No retirement. No. One lady, they even gave her 30-year pen and then refused to pay her for a 30-year retirement. At General Motors, of course, they're in bankruptcy, but 80% of theirs was management. It's just like after they cut a lot of things and we knew BorgWarner was going to close, Maganella, who is the president of BorgWarner right now, used to be the head of Warner Gear or BorgWarner division before he moved up. He got his job because his wife family owned a lot of stock in BorgWarner. I didn't dislike him, but he pulled a lot of things that was definitely wrong. They sent this manual transmission to Mexico, and there was a friend of mine that was a company man. He worked for them for years, and he had done different jobs from timekeeping to boss over incoming stock to boss over lines. Well, when the line went down, they told him, your job went to Mexico, you're out, you're fired, or laid off, or whatever. He had a lot of time. And they put a girl in a job over me. Her mother was close to one of the bosses, and Heather was a very good boss. I won't knock her. But this person was better, except they had to pay him more money. So they ousted him with nothing, and he wasn't even 65 to where he could draw his anything other than unemployment. And when people like that start treating people like that, it causes people that are their workers to care less. When you know that somebody cares for you or has a little respect for your work, then you try to do the work better. And when you lose that respect with workers, management's going to lose. And some of these people don't realize it. They sent me a stock option because some of my 401 was in BorgWarner stock. So they sent me a letter wanting me to sign for Maganella to have a bonus. He had cut our insurance and other things right before that, and our wages, and took away things that I felt shouldn't have been took away. And so I wrote a nasty letter, and I'm sure it didn't do a bit of good, but I definitely said I would not vote for him when he's making more as a CEO than what any of the workers at the plant made in their lifetime. And to me, I don't feel this is right. I don't feel it's right for these sports people to be making millions and upping the cost of tickets at these coliseums and stuff when they can make, I'm not saying they shouldn't make good money because they have a short span on their, when they're actually making it. But the salaries that some of them are getting has to boost the cost of those tickets. And it's getting to where the average person can't even enjoy America's pastime of baseball or basketball or whatever, football or whatever they want to see because the tickets are overpriced.
Do you feel like when you came to 46 and there was more respect from management to you as a worker? Did you know management personally?
My dad was foreman there for quite a while. And yeah, you usually knew the foremans, and there was some that you didn't like or didn't have respect for, and there was other ones you had a lot of respect. Back then, early on, usually they took the foremans from guys that had worked there and was like either group leaders or some guy that knew a lot about the jobs. Later on, they hired college kids or ones that was not even through college. They call them temps, and they come in and then make them foremans, and they wouldn't even know nothing. Now, I'm not knocking them because a few of them earned my respect, but a lot of them didn't. But I used to badmouth a boss that I had, one boss, and I called him a dumb SOB, and later I didn't dislike him, but he was actually pretty much of an idiot. His wife had a lot of stock, or his mother, and they tried to fire him. This friend of mine that got to be head boss there, and he tried to get me to go on the floor, and I wouldn't do it. But anyway, he tried to get rid of him, and they called from Chicago and made him put him back on. But I'll give him credit. Later on, he would have been one of the best bosses of any of them down there almost, because he could start and stop machines. He could show somebody how to run one. He was kind of overbearing in a lot of his ways, and he pulled stupid tricks, like he blowed a few machines up doing things he shouldn't have done. But later on, a lot of the bosses they had, if somebody had got their hand in a machine or something, they wouldn't know how to stop it to keep the arm or hand from being mutilated worse. To me, this was wrong. You know, for a company to hire somebody that has no more knowledge of machinery than some of those people had. And we went in one day and they had a safety device wired to where the robot would run even with the gate open, and that's a federal law against that. And yet one of the night bosses had told him to go ahead and do it because he didn't want to lose the production. And it should have been fixed by a technician. When we come in on days and I seen it, well, the lady that was working with me opened the gate and started in, and the robot didn't stop. It was coming at her. And she told me, and I went back and checked, and I called it in. I shut everything down on that end.
Was there a point in time where everything seemed to change that sticks out in your mind, where they did start hiring in managers that really didn't know what they were doing? Is there a point in time or some sort of time frame you can give me on that?
There was just different frames. In other words, when they went away from the group system of production to the lights, that was one bad move. Then when they went from the lights to the straight Arley, that was a bad move. And then they hired a colored lady in personnel that was hiring people, and she was selling jobs to colored people. They fired her later, but she ended up getting money back from them because she sued them. And rather than fight it, I think they paid off, but everybody knew about it. And there was a lot of people that got in there that wasn't qualified. And I'm like this. If you have 20% colored and 18% Mexican, and the rest are white, then I think you should have the same number of workers in a plant to be fair. Well, it got to where the numbers, because this lady was selling jobs, was a lot worse. And I don't know, this may come back on me if this goes on the air, so I don't know. But the percentage, in my opinion, to be fair, and I worked with a colored lady that I had a lot of respect for, and I went to her retirement dinner, and there was very few of us, the white people was there, but she is real nice and a good worker. She was the one that stepped into the gate when the robot kept going. And I have never been what's called a bigot, and I believe in fairness, but a lot of things gets unfair when they take somebody that's not as qualified as somebody that is qualified to try to even out. If they're qualified, I say more power to them. If a person's a colored doctor, I've been to colored doctors, didn't bother me a bit. But if giving people something just because they're Mexican or they're colored or they're something else, to me the only people in the United States that deserves more than they get is probably the Indians, because this government stole from them all the years. I mean, if you go back from the start, all the land was theirs when people first come over here. And then they end up with reservations that's not fit to live on, and in my own personal opinion, most of them got abused badly.
Was there a lot of racial tension in the plant?
I don't think so, no. Not much. There was some. I got into it with one young colored boy one time. He told me I owed him. He was sitting there at a bench not doing anything, and that's before it went to straight hourly. It was when he was taking money out of my pocket. That's the reason I said the group system worked, because when somebody wasn't doing anything, everybody on the group usually said something to him before they even went to the boss. And this one day, this kid said, "Well, you owe me." And I told him, I said, "The only person I owe in this life is my mom and my dad." And I said, "You're not either one of them." And I said, "I was in the service so that you could be okay." And I said, "You don't even respect your elders." I said, "You think everybody owes you a living." I said, "You've got a job." I said, "Work at it." And he never gave me any more trouble. But no, overall there was not any, I don't think, any racial tension at Warner Gear. Most, even though, like I say, it got in the, after that person was in the office of hiring, the numbers was uneven to what they actually should have been. But that still didn't bother me that much. It bothers me when company don't do things they should do.
You've been around BorgWarner basically your entire life, with your father working there and you working there.
And my granddad worked there.
What'd your grandfather do? See, that would have been really early on, wouldn't it?
Well, when I went there, they still had overhead belt drives on a lot of the machines, where you shut them off with a pull bar. A lot of the people couldn't even realize that. Later, we had a grinder on one of the groups I was on that was one of them overhead belt drive machines, and they put a motor on it. And a lot of people couldn't even run it because it was touchy. It was a grinder, but it was a good grinder if you knew what you was doing.
What role, if characterize this. Did BorgWarner play in the community?
They was like Ball Brothers, and like Ball Brothers started Ball State, or it was Ball College at that time. It was normal college, and then Ball started putting a lot of money. They changed the name to Ball, and then it became a university. And Ball, still, their fund, I still has a fair amount of money going there, I think, even though they moved out of Muncie, which I hated to see. But it's just like this city had Acme Lee's, Chevy, Delco Battery, all kind of plants. Ball Brothers had rubber plant where I worked for when I was still in the school. I worked there. They had a aluminum plant that was really big. They made batteries for all your battery companies, like Rayovac and all them. They made the casings, and that was the highest paid place in Muncie for years. Them guys in the rolling mill over there, they made real big money. It was hot and hard work, but it paid a lot of money.
So BorgWarner wasn't even the top job when you got hired in Muncie?
No. The Ball zinc mill was the highest. Well, I'm not sure. Indiana Bridge may have been paying as much or more than Muncie, than BorgWarner or Warner Gear. Acme Lee's definitely paid more than Warner Gear. And Chevy paid more than Warner Gear.
So when you were out and about around town and you told people, you're talking to people and you say, I work out at BorgWarner, what kind of reaction did you get? Shrug shoulders?
Well, a lot of people, later on, a lot of people thought that you had it made if you worked there, but there was a lot of people. I was very fortunate. I never got laid off. I got in there, and there was 2 or 3 times they got within 1 or 2 people from laying me off, but then they'd call back. They used to lay off every year at model change, every year that Ford had or Chevy or any of them had a model change. Why? And then the union hurt Warner Gear one year when they had a long strike, and Ford built their own automatic transmission plant. That did hurt BorgWarner or Warner Gear. And that's one that, in my opinion, shouldn't have been that long. But you know, it's hard to second guess the people that's trying to win things that you need. There was things gave up in the last 3 contracts that should have never been give up. We got the union got what all the other plants around had, paid sick days. Well, the people in management, or upper management, probably Chicago, said, well, we don't want to do the bookwork of paying it like General Motors did when the person took the day off sick. Said, what we'll do, we'll give you the days, but they didn't give us as many as General Motors had. They gave us 10. General Motors had 14 at the time, I think. Or anyway, there was a difference in the number of days. But anyway, they put it on and they called it a Christmas bonus. Well then, 2 contracts ago, they took the Christmas bonus away. Well, that wasn't actually a Christmas bonus. That was paid sick days. So we never had paid sick days. If you was off, you just lost it. I'm not too much for that many paid sick days, but I feel people should have a few. And the union made a big mistake, in my opinion, when they went to straight hourly rate. They stayed with the old method of your weeks of the way they paid the vacation bonus was paid on a percentage of what you made on the year. Well, if you worked a lot of overtime, you had a real good vacation pay, and it would equal out to more than the hours. And then they went to straight hourly rate. If you was off sick, you didn't even get much money to pay for the days you was off. But the union didn't straighten that out. But see, comes up as my opinion. It don't necessarily reflect those of some of the younger people or some of the other people.
Mr. Martin, you mind if we switch tapes real quick?
No, go ahead.
Okay, great.
But like I said, when they took out the lab where we made all the new designs, like right now, them people in that lab would be designing these all-wheel motors and things like that to work. When they took that away from Muncie, I knew the plant was doomed to be closed. And so did a lot of people that had any intelligence about the plant. And I run into people now, the younger guys, that I really hate to see how they got treated at the last. I run into one last Saturday, and he's working for his brother-in-law at a job that don't pay near as much, but he has got a job which is better than some of them, and he's going to school also. But they are paying for that, which helps. I mean, BorgWarner is not completely thing, but my opinion, no company should be paying some of them CEOs that much money when they're underfunded on their pension and when they're losing money. In other words, like that Chevy, the one that was over General Motors, took in great big bonuses and one under him.
Evidently Stitch's in meeting in here, is that correct?
You want to talk to Bruce?
Well, we've had a couple interruptions today. Usually it's quiet back here in this corner. You know, I'd love to just touch on the union just a little bit more, if you don't mind. And really, you talked about kind of the effectiveness earlier of the union in representing your interests. Do you feel like the union was effective in representing your interest, or what was your
I feel it was up until it went to straight hourly rate is probably when it went to the lights. It started deteriorating as to what the people really needed and wanted way back then. In other words, the union, in my opinion, they made a big mistake. The company wanted to see these CNC machines should be an air-conditioned environment. Well, this one section of the plant had a lot of CNC, and the company wanted to air condition it. And the union said, not unless you do the whole plant. That was wrong. They should have let them do that and then said, well, it's not fair to the other workers have to work in this 100 and some degrees, which it got in there a lot of days. When it was 90 out in that shop, it'd be like 110 or 120 with all them big motors running. And, you know, there's a lot of people went to work there that quit there and went out because they didn't like the conditions in the plant. When I first went there, you talk about conditions, they had wood floors, wood blocks. And when it rained, you walk on some of them and oil and water would squirt up your pants leg and down in your sock. Later they done away with all that and went to cement floors. And then they went with, they used to put sawdust down around the machines to keep the oil or water from spreading over to other parts of the floor. And they went away from that and started using things that was called, they was just rolls of rag with sawdust in them or some kind of material that would absorb, and they started buying them from people to keep, and a lot of it is where the machines should have been repaired and they wouldn't want to shut them down to repair them and do them right. And they didn't want to pay skilled trades to work the weekend to do the job right. And like I said, a lot of that was poor management. It's when somebody says, well, this repairman is sitting there on his hind end too many hours, we don't need that many repairmen. Well, when a repairman's sitting, that means the machines are running and they're making money. When he's up, they're losing money. And when you don't have enough repairmen to keep the machines running, they're losing a lot of money. And that's what BorgWarner got into. They got into where they thought they was being cost efficient on skilled trades. It was actually costing themselves all kind of money.
Did you ever hold any leadership positions in the union?
No, I refused. They tried to get me to run for Sturt. One year I kind of wished that I had of, but I never took a foreman's job, and I was offered that more than once.
Why'd you refuse?
Well, the foreman's job, you was between the worker and upper management, and both of them is going to give you a lot of flack. And the pay I was making on most of the jobs I was on, because I was usually on groups and where the people would work, we made more money than the foreman's was making. And I didn't feel that wearing a white shirt or being able to walk around and get on somebody or sign their day work was worth a cut in pay just to have a title. Now, I had a friend that I'd run around with for years, and two of them took the job as foreman and all at the same time I was asked. But I just, like I said, most of the jobs I was on paid more. And I was there for one thing. That was the money. I wasn't there for friends or anything else. I had a lot of friends from there and still do. But my main concern was livelihood.
So did the union play a role within the community? That was...
They played quite a bit for years. But it got like when I retired, they'd always give a watch. I never got a watch when I retired with 62 years. And I donated money every time somebody would retire. They'd go around and take a collection. I never got a collection took up for me. And I'd paid, if I had all the money that I'd paid over the 60 years for people that was retiring, I would have had a fairly good 401k. Yeah, but you know, that's when somebody's retiring that you've worked with or know, you usually donate. It varied from year to year. It got to where it was more later on, but it used to be $1 or $2, and then it got up to where it was $5 and so. But over the years, it ended up as a lot of money. Would have.
Was BorgWarner a good place to work as a family man?
It was actually one of the better places in Muncie, especially after Ball and Acme Lee's went out. It was it and General Motors was the two best plants left. And they was, a lot of times there was graduates from Ball State that was teachers, felt that a lot of the people was overpaid that was working there. But if they had to go in the plant and do the job, most of them would not stay, because it takes a certain type of person to be able to put up with the fumes and the heat and the cold and the hassle that you have in a plant. You go in the plant after they've been closed down over the weekend when it's cold weather. I've went in there and there'd be ice in the machines, in the water, the cooling water. And used to be years ago, now it got to where they found ways to combat it, but years ago, you go in there on a Sunday night, the machines would stink so bad that any of these hog farms would smell like perfume compared to what it smelled like. The water would sour and turn black. And once you got air into it, in other words, about 4 hours into the night, it would start being where it was halfway breathable. But until then, it wasn't on a Sunday night.
And that all changed over time?
Yeah, later on they found things that would sweeten the water, and then they found better waters that didn't sour that bad. And of course, that's advancements in technology. You know, these companies that makes the coolants, the additives, but then the company got to where they went cheaper a lot of times, and it caused them more trouble, and they didn't realize that. And that was management, trying to cut costs. They had overhead lines at the plant that run water to all the machines, and they had a central system that pumped it up there. Well, grinding water has one consistency. Cutting water for lathes and drills and other type has a different consistency. It has a heavier lube in it. Grinding has a little less because it'd load up the wheel. They got to where when them was shut down like over a weekend, this new stuff that they bought was supposed to be cheaper. It would clog them lines and you couldn't get no waters, and the plumbers had to go around and tear the lines apart and try to free them or try to force a lot of air or a lot of water pressure through them to break it. They'd come out in great big globs. The water lines is about this big around, probably 6-inch to 8-inch water lines. Some of them might have even been 10 or 12. But anyway, they would clog up and the stuff would be just like lard or something to where it wouldn't even move. And it'd come out in a gel form. And it was only because they went to a cheaper coolant additive trying to save money. But it cost them on the wear on their tools and on unclogging the line. And like I said, a lot of these decisions was one of these guys up there in purchasing saying, oh, I'll save you money. And they don't even test it first. Years ago, before they brought a new tool in, they'd bring it out and let you test it and tell them whether you liked it or not, whether it done a better job. Later on, them guys up there would order, and when you started breaking a bunch and the boss would raise heck to his superior, why then the department head would say, hey, this is costing me money. And they used to give the department head a bonus on the amount of money he saved for his department. Well, and later on, they even went away from that. And so some of them bosses didn't even worry about what the cost of running their department was, unless they was afraid of losing their job.
Are you glad to be done with the politics and the just going to the factory every day, or is that something that you miss?
I would say if the factory was still running good, I would probably still be in there working. Not necessarily because I miss the work. I miss certain things of it, but mainly it would be financial. Because I've got a 15-year-old daughter. And when you have things like that, and it makes a difference on the amount of your income and output and so forth.
Can you describe in a little more detail the significance of the closing to you and your family?
It didn't hurt us near as much as most people because like I was already getting and because I had so many years, your pension is based on years. You got so much for each year of service. Because I had 62 years, I'm probably drawing way more than anyone in Muncie as far as pension and Social Security, because my Social Security went up also because I was still working and paying into it. So the more you make and the more you pay into it, the higher it goes. So therefore, I was lucky in that way. But yet, my lifestyle's got to change a lot. I had a talk with my wife, but anyway, yeah, there's changes, a lot of change. And the union, you ask about the union probably had more intercommunications with the people working there than the company ever did after they stopped giving decent things for retirement and years of service and all. At one time, BorgWarner, when I first went to work there, they had basketball teams and stuff like that. The company did. And they took a lot of pride in that. And if you was a good ball player, why, they would hire you on right away. And there was a lot of people that later left BorgWarner and made successful lives and other things. But the union later, when you're talking about from the 60s on, I would say, the union had more picnics, social dances, things for the people than the company ever did. But like I said, the unions made a lot of mistakes too. And they have all over, or a lot of them wouldn't have failed as bad as they have.
What do you think is the significance of BorgWarner's closing to the Muncie community? How does Muncie bounce back?
Unless they get, and I doubt if they ever do. My perspective on this, if you look at other cities that had industrial and they lost them, and they was college as big as Ball State is, like Lafayette and all, they tend to become a college town. Bloomington, Muncie was not, they benefited from the college and they liked the college and people respected it and backed their sports as much as most places, but they still liked the food and things that places like BorgWarner and Ball and General Motors, those plants would give the people, which they're losing that now, and you've got a large number of people that don't have decent jobs in Muncie now, which everything hurts. Your economy is down, so it's just like in Muncie. I've voted both ways as far as politics, but personally I think this mayor's made so many bad decisions that's pathetic. She closed number 1 fire station, that's right downtown where all the big buildings and old places are. And to me, that one was one that should have been kept. I don't care of its age, it should have been kept open. And I know she's, like a lot of other people, like some of these CEOs got plants that's not performing. They also don't look at some of the benefits. BorgWarner Gear over the years made BorgWarner probably the majority of their profit for years. And they just got where they didn't want to put any more money into it. And like I say, I'm not saying theirs was a bad decision, but a lot of them they made before, like getting rid of the industrial and the marine, and some of those things were bad decisions. Because that plant could have been working full force. They could have hired as many people on that marine transmission if they'd have done it when theirs was popular. They could have hired as many people as what the 4-wheel drive is running before they closed. But they didn't want to put their money into it.
What scared them off? What scared the company off? Do you think it was a union, or do you think it was something else? I know they were the last, you guys were like the last union shop for BorgWarner, I believe. One of the last, anyway.
We was the only one. See, that's another thing. They had most of their plants was non-union. They wanted them all that way. That was probably one of their major concerns of closing that plant. But besides it, the productivity had went downhill, but it was strictly their fault. When you allow people, even good workers, to see other people that's not doing anything and saying it all pays the same, it knocks their incentive to do a good day's job when they see somebody sitting over there that should be working. So it all boils back to where I said when they was paying for what you put out. But when I first went there, a lot of people wouldn't believe the pay that we was getting back then. Like I said, it wasn't near what Ball Brothers or Acme Lee's or Delco or GM was paying. I got my first $2.50 an hour in 1960. I got my first check for $100 a week for 40 hours in 1960. And of course, prices and everything went up, so did wages. Right now, your minimum wage is higher than what we was making back then.
You know, Mr. Martin, those are really all the questions I have today. But at this point, I'd like to give you an opportunity to touch on anything about BorgWarner and Muncie that we haven't.
No, I'm fine. The only reason I come, you said sounded like you wanted to do it, so.
Well, I appreciate your time today. Thanks a lot.